Chairman, we're now live.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to those attending and also to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Resident Services Select Committee, and my name is Councillor Wayne Bridges, and I'm Chairman of this meeting. The key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today is shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and also accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. For those present in the room and intending to speak, please note that you'll be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. For those in the public gallery, you will not be on camera. A reminder to councillors, officers and those speaking today that you should turn your microphone button on when speaking. This will ensure you can be heard in the room and by those watching online. Before we go on to our main agenda, some housekeeping rules. We're not expecting a fire alarm this evening. However, if one does go off, please follow the officers to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting point, which is the Civic Centre forecourt. Mobile devices to be switched off or placed on silent. And we also have residents' feedback forms available in this meeting and also online underneath the broadcast. And finally, may I also welcome all new members here this evening and also former members of the old committee prior to the elections. You're very most welcome, and I look forward to working with you all over the next year. We start with apologies for absence, please.
No apologies, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest in matters coming before this meeting? I can see no indications. Thank you very much. Which brings us on to item 3, which is to receive the minutes of the previous meeting, pages 1 to 2. Are there any comments or questions? Are we happy to note them? Thank you very much. Item 4, I can confirm that all business this evening will be discussed in part 1. There are no part 2 items to be considered this evening, which brings us on to item 5, the introduction to overview and scrutiny in Hillingdon, which I will hand over to Mark. I appreciate there are some new members here this evening, so I will just clarify the best practice when it comes to asking questions. So we will allow the officers to give their presentations first. I will then invite members to ask questions. Each member will ask a question. If they wish to follow up after the answer has been given, they are welcome to do so by way of a supplementary or a further question. After that point, I will go on to the next member to ensure that everyone is allowed to ask a question each. At that point, once we've gone round the table, I will then invite other members to ask questions who have already done so earlier in the meeting. If we're all happy with that. Mark, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and it's good to see you, councillors, especially those newly elected. Part of my role, as well as supporting the democratic processes of the council and supporting yourselves, is to be statutory scrutiny officer. And that role that I hold is to promote overview and scrutiny and provide the support and guidance necessary to you on this committee and the other committees in terms of exercising your important role on this committee. I'm going to take the report on the agenda as read, that you've read that, and I'm going to do a relatively shortish presentation highlighting the key features of overview and scrutiny. It is aimed at the newly elected councillors, but hopefully a useful refresh for those that have been re-elected. And as Councillor Bridges said, I'm happy to take questions at the end. What I'd like to stress from the start, though, is overview and scrutiny in Hillingdon is interesting and can be greatly satisfying. As ward councillors, you can add real value through your own local knowledge and insight gained from your day-to-day contact with your residents. You can also make a real difference to the council's decision-making and policy-making processes. Such committees have helped make many changes to council services over the years, big changes, small changes, and some have made recommendations that have had a national impact. But just to give you a small taste, I always recall one committee review many years ago, 10 years ago now, 2012. The relevant overview and scrutiny committee at the time, because they were called different things, investigated a special grant that we provide to children in the council's care when they leave that care and they transition to independent lives. The committee heard from witnesses, took evidence from other local authorities, and importantly, the care leavers themselves, on the cost of their living and transitioning to become independent from the council's care. That led to the committee recommending an increase in the grant that we give to the care leavers of at least 50%. That went to Cabinet. Amongst other findings, Cabinet agreed it. The grant increase was applied to the next financial year's budget. Now that simple yet meaningful change has since made a real difference to the lives of probably hundreds of young people in Hillingdon. So it just gives you one example of what you can achieve. Right, going on. I'm just going to take you through these slides. You've got them in front of you. I have to admit, I have been tweaking with them a bit this afternoon since I printed them off, but it's nothing that should worry you. So I'm going to take you through the role and purpose of overview and scrutiny, how the select committees work, the scrutiny call-in procedure. I'm going to leave this next for your July round of meetings, effective policy reviews. We're going to focus more on how you do your policy reviews at that meeting. And then some scrutiny essentials at the end, some do's and don'ts. So let's start off, give some context, really. This is pretty basic stuff, so I do apologise, but we've got the full council in the middle. This is how the Hillingdon is governed, full council, with all 53 of you, where you met the other day. You've got the executive, the leader and the cabinet at the top in blue, who make the key decisions across all services and policies and projects and works across the council. On the left-hand side, you've got the regulatory and quasi-judicial committees like planning and licensing that make decisions. And then at the bottom, you've got your partnership bodies, outside bodies that you may be appointed to, and other forums such as the Domestic Abuse Executive Steering Group, which Councillor Gardner here sits on. But importantly, on the right, you've got your select committees, and they're a fundamental arm of the council's democratic processes and how the council is governed. And I will go into their role with you today. Again, this is really basic, and I apologise, but I use this for part of the training for new managers and staff into Hillingdon, particularly those that come from the private sector that want to enter local government, and gives you a context of where select committees sit. So nationally, we have our Sovereign, Her Majesty. Locally, we have our, if you like, our equivalent, the Mayor, First Citizen, Councillor Hagger. Nationally, we have our legislature, that's the House of Parliament, obviously, so House of Commons there, and we also have our full council, which is Hillingdon's equivalent there of you all together. Nationally, you have the government, you've got the cabinet there, and locally we have Hillingdon's cabinet. And then nationally, you have select committees in Parliament that hold the government to account, undertake reviews and write reports or recommendations, and this is exactly what you do here in select committees. And supporting all that, you have the civil service nationally, and you have local government officers nationally. And that is an old photo. I'm told working arrangements are far better than that now. So, the law around overview and scrutiny. Well, these committees are set out in law, and each council must have at least one overview and scrutiny committee. Larger councils, like Hillingdon, should have more than one. And there are three primary roles for these committees: to assist in council policy development, question and evaluate the actions of the cabinet before and after decisions are made, and using 1 and 2 there to make reports on such matters to the cabinet or, in some circumstances, to the full council. We must also have a committee by law that scrutinises our health providers, such as the NHS, and another committee, which is actually this committee, to act as a crime and disorder committee to scrutinise the work of the Safer Hillingdon Partnership, which includes partners like the police. And there's the structure, which I think you probably saw in the council report, which shows the 5 select committees, how neatly aligned they are with the cabinet portfolios, which is really good in terms of accountability. And although not on that chart, the council's directorates where the officers work in are also very neatly aligned now. So it's a lot more understandable and accountable in terms of our governance arrangements. So your role on these committees, your duties and powers. Well, you're here to challenge, scrutinise and monitor local services. Act as the statutory check and balance on the cabinet, the work the cabinet does and the cabinet members do. To be constructive, obviously, but also a critical friend when required to the cabinet. And a key part of your role is to drive service improvement and changes for residents. Use your local knowledge. That's the importance of these, and it's stressed in national guidance, to use your local knowledge as ward councillors to amplify the voice and concerns of your residents. You have statutory powers set out in law as well for overview and scrutiny committees. You have the call-in procedure, which I'll come on to later. That's where you can call in cabinet decisions or cabinet member decisions. You have the power to send a report to cabinet and council, and they can't not ignore that report. They can make decisions on it, but they can't ignore the fact that you sent that report. You have the power to require the attendance, compel the attendance of officers, senior officers and cabinet members, although that's not been used in Hillingdon for many, many, many years because officers and cabinet members attend willingly. And you have the power to request certain information, which I'll touch on at the end. And not your committee, but the Health and Social Care Committee has the power to refer substantial NHS changes or proposals in services to the Secretary of State for Health in certain circumstances. As a committee, you have no direct decision-making powers. Quite obviously, you're not an executive body, but you can make recommendations. So, 3 key roles. I'm going to take you through each of those 3 very briefly. Before 2021, a year or so ago, we did have different committees that undertook those 3 roles: scrutiny, policy review and overview. And Councillor Bridges might remember the Executive Scrutiny Committee we had, which just focused on the part of the scrutiny role only, and then we had policy overview committees that undertook roles 2 and 3 on there. Now, with these updated arrangements, all 5 select committees undertake all those roles. And before we go on to that, your remit, in terms of your committee, what full council has said it would like this select committee to look at and go into? It's important to keep within your remit. Very, very important to keep within your remit. I appreciate sometimes things can cut across services, and then you can come and seek advice if that's something that you as a committee can take forward. But you've got some very key resident-focused services there under your remit, and they're led by the Cabinet Member for Resident Services, Councillor Eddie Lavery. I've added some extra bits on there which you haven't got in your charts to drill down on some of those services. So community safety, licensing, trading standards enforcement, that's antisocial behaviour, that's trading standards, that's parking services also, and the imported food office at Heathrow. Planning and regeneration, that's a very important, that's a big function, that's specialist planning services around conservation, and then the wider regeneration plans for our town centres and things like that. Housing policy, homelessness and tenancy management. And the green spaces brief is much bigger than what it seems there. It includes libraries, theatres, museums, crematoriums, just to give you some more examples, and then waste services at the end. So some really key services that residents use, which you'll be looking into as a committee. And then you have some cross-cutting topics. Climate change, big one. We had a climate declaration that was approved by the full council a couple of years ago now, I think, where this committee was charged, it was named something other at the time, but this committee is charged with monitoring the council's strategic climate action plan and how it's delivering upon that. And it comes to this committee on a regular basis, and I think it's due later this year to the committee. And then you've got the 2 big transport sort of projects or schemes or initiatives or issues even in the borough with HS2 and Heathrow. And community cohesion, that's a very important topic, and we do, I think, put that on as a standing item where our community cohesion manager, Fiona, comes along, talks to you about what we're doing to try and promote good community faith relationships across the borough, and also talk about the important prevent agenda as well. So you also have, and actually leading on from that, I suppose, you have your statutory crime disorder scrutiny. And we will go into this more detail when you start to do this as a committee, but you're able, as well as council services, to scrutinise the work of the Safer Hillingdon Partnership, and this includes, other than the council that sits on it, senior representatives, so you're talking your chief inspectors, superintendents, for example, in the police, Metropolitan Police Service, Fire Brigade, the National Probation Service, and our colleagues here also in Public Health. And they sit on the Safer Hillingdon Partnership, which I think the Cabinet Member also sits on. And that's the strategic executive side, if you like, trying to improve community safety and partnership working in the borough, but you have a role to hold those bodies to account. And it's the only forum, democratic forum, that exists to hold, for example, the police to account in the borough in a democratic way. So, how do you do all this work? I mean, it's a lot of work. It's going to be, but you have a thing called a multi-year work programme. It's on the end of your agenda, and it sets out your activity. I would, and Liz will help you with this, try and keep it manageable over the time when you add topics to it or you move things around. You clearly don't want to be here for a 45-minute meeting and then next month you're here for a 3.5-hour meeting. You want to keep it manageable. It can get difficult because you've got witness sessions where you just don't know how long they go on. You might find something, you want to probe that witness more and ask them questions because it's an important matter. But the work programme is your work programme. It's flexible. There's no deadline to it apart from 4 years' time. But you don't need to get anything done by the AGM next year or to Cabinet by April next year. It's not limited to municipal years. It transcends that, and it gives you added flexibility where you need to manage your work and do things. So it's quite good, really. And it's owned by you, steered by the chairman, clearly, and it's in your agenda at the end, which I'm sure you might make some comments on. So I'm going to go quickly through those 3 roles that I talked about. Scrutiny first. 4 aspects to this. Pre-decision scrutiny. This is where you monitor the forward plan, which is also on the agenda. That sets out all the expected at the time cabinet decisions, generally speaking, to be taken over the coming months and year. And it's refreshed every month, and you get a copy of that. It's also you get a version on your agenda which just relates to your own select committee. And you're able to give official comments to Cabinet on matters before decisions are made. Now, this is not always the case because you have had to really have considered the report or seen the report or have considered the matter in detail before you actually submit comments, you know, to Cabinet. So sometimes there are opportunities to do this. It's not a matter of course. It's not by default. The system is not set up so every report going to Cabinet comes via a select committee for comments first. But we have constructive relationships with Cabinet members, and where the committee may want to perhaps request, could that report possibly come earlier, or could we be briefed earlier about this issue in order to provide some comments to Cabinet? That is often possible. Post-decision scrutiny, this is where we haven't done much of this over the years, where let's say Cabinet a year ago approved a brand new housing policy of some kind, and you as a committee thought, well, it will be good to see how this is working. Let's ask the officers in and see how this is working. This policy is being implemented to benefit residents. So you can look at a previous decision and say, let's see how that's been implemented well or not. Then you've got the scrutiny call-in. Again, I'll come on to this later. This is where you can, just as a decision is made, call that in, and there's a procedure for doing that. And then scrutiny of external partners, which we've touched on, which in this case would be the Safer Hillingdon Partnership for your committee. Policy review role, the second role. So this is a key area of activity. Number 1 there, you have your own committee-owned policy reviews. This is the primary activity you undertake, usually with in-depth reviews. You could decide to have one-off meetings, possibly, but they include witness sessions and evidence gathering. There's a whole array of information that you as a committee can access and secure to develop your review, and people you can invite where they're able to come to support your review. And it's not just internally focused. The important point is to involve residents, the stakeholders, the community in your reviews wherever possible. And then you write, ultimately, your report to Cabinet. There is a lot of guidance given on how policy reviews are undertaken. We'll do that at the next meeting. There's some stuff actually in on your flyers there about that, which you might want to read as well. Past policy reviews, where a previous committee that might have had your remit might have done a review, say, a year ago. You might want to see how and it went to Cabinet, and Cabinet agreed the recommendations. You might want to see how they're being implemented. So we call the officers in for that. Policy shaping. This is where the Cabinet member may say, well, I've got a policy coming up in a few months' time, and I wouldn't mind it, if it's possible, going via the Select Committee for their comments and input, because I quite like to get that before I make a decision. And it's not, as I say, a matter of course, but we do have an example on another committee where, in the education sphere, where there's a policy coming later in the year, and the Cabinet member's quite keen that that comes via the relevant select committee for their input. And then you do have your big policy framework documents. These are the big strategic documents that are approved by the full council, setting out the framework for how the Cabinet, if you like, delivers its services and policies and makes its decisions. There's only a few of those documents, but we do have one coming forward to this committee, and they're required in law to come to a select committee as part of the consultation and development. And that is the council strategy, and that's coming to this committee. That's going to all select committees at your July meeting. Final role, your overview role. This is quite straightforward, really. This is where you monitor services and how they operate. Could be monitoring the performance, and we're looking at quarterly performance monitoring later in the year, giving you a scorecard or KPIs so you can keep track on trends of services. Topical matters, there could be something that crops up, something in the news, something's happened locally where you might need to ask officers to come in and give you an update. Perfect example, I think 2-3 years ago was in February 2020 when something was happening over in China. Our Director of Public Health came to one of these meetings and members sought assurances from him, is everything going to be okay? So there could be things that crop up over time, and you might want to bring them to the committee. Budget monitoring, you also have a role in monitoring the budgets within the services within your remits twice a year as well, and submit comments to Cabinet on them. So this call-in procedure, this scrutiny call-in app, this is where the ultimate check and balance, really, the right to delay, not stop ultimately, but delay a Cabinet or Cabinet member decision which has just been made in order for you as a committee to consider the decision and give your views back to Cabinet. Guidance says it should be used exceptionally, and where councillors, you feel you need to intervene because the decision, in your view, needs to be revisited or possibly changed. There's no other guidance saying what cannot and can and cannot be called in, apart from the guidance I actually have listed in the report, which is more of technical guidance. For example, you can't call in a decision where Cabinet has noted something, because that's not a decision, clearly. That's just them noting something that's happened. They're not deciding. There could be certain decisions by Cabinet that need to go to the full council, ultimately, to be approved, so you can't call those in, for example, because it's going to go via your select committee at some point anyway, and then on to the council. So they're pretty obvious decisions where you can't call in, but overall, 99% of decisions that are made by the Cabinet member can be called in by the relevant select committee and the councillors on that select committee. So each time a Cabinet decision is made or a Cabinet member decision is made on a service area or a project, on the decision notice it lists which select committee can call that in, or which members of that select committee can call that in. And if a councillor feels that that decision is not right, it might need to be revisited for whatever reason, and I admit it could be slightly political sometimes, it could be because of different policy sort of views councillors might have on matters. But to do that, we have an app, and I will take you through how that works very briefly, and I will be sending you more details tonight on the app and how to access and use that in exceptional circumstances. So when you, on each decision notice, there's a little link on it, and it'll take you to this app immediately. So you just click, you see a decision, you read it about it, and you can click on the link, and you click on New Call-in Request on the left-hand side, and it takes you as a councillor to a form, and it's just a simple case of filling the form in with sufficient detail to say why you want to call that Cabinet decision in, and you can attach other documentation to it and things like that, and it just populates it with the date the decision was made, the details of what it is, and Cabinet member decisions are all numbered, so you can just put the number down, but give your reasons why you want to call that in, and then you press submit. And then automatically all of you here will get an email, including the councillor that did that, saying Councillor X has just submitted a call-in request on this topic or this decision the Cabinet has made, and you will get a link at the bottom to say click here to find out more, and whether you want to respond to it. You don't have to click on the link, but if you click on the link, you'll come to a page like this where you can decide whether you want to approve or reject that call-in request by the councillor, and give comments if you want to, that you support it or you don't support it and why. And you press, I think that's green to submit at the end there. And your names will be pre-populated there, so you'll see your names and you just go next to your name and whether you approve or reject. And then a voting tally is kept on the system, which you can also look at. These are just some test ones from when we did this a while back, but the magic number is 4. A majority is required for any call-in request to be valid. So whilst a councillor can go on here and make a call-in request and say, I'm not happy with this decision for whatever reason, it needs 4 councillors to agree to be in the green there for that call-in to then be valid. So you can see the running total there. If in the event 4 councillors do decide to call in that decision, then that cabinet decision is immediately put on hold. It cannot be implemented, and you as a select committee convene a special meeting to call in the officers, perhaps the cabinet member, to say, why have you made this decision? We don't agree with it because of this. Can you relook at it? And then, you take their evidence and you might say, well, actually, we feel the cabinet member is right and we now understand why they want to do this. And you can say, okay, we'll support that decision, and then it's implemented. Or you could say, well, actually, no, we still feel there's issues here. So you could say to the cabinet member, we want to send it back to cabinet for you to reconsider, and cabinet will meet again and reconsider that. So you can't ultimately stop a decision if cabinet is intent on pushing it through, but you can delay it in an accountable, transparent, public forum, i.e. this committee, in terms of your concerns about a decision. As I say, we only had 3 call-in requests last year, so none reached a majority, but it is advised strongly that they're used in exceptional circumstances, and that's national guidance too. So I'll be sending you more details on that tomorrow, or tonight actually, so you can look at that. I'm going to skip these 3 slides here. They're about policy reviews. And finally, final, I think, 2 slides now. I would just like to stress the importance of your clerk, Liz Penny, here in this case. Liz does so much more than takes the minutes. She does all your research. She commissions the work that you need, that you request as a committee, and she'll write your final reports that go to cabinet and help you with that, and work with the witnesses and liaise with them and all the stuff you can imagine that would entail your business. So a key contact. And rules and guidance, how you operate. Well, I've put them in the agenda for your meeting, but essentially Chapter 6 of the Council Constitution is your rule book. That sets out how overview and scrutiny works. That's been approved by full council. And at the end of that, there's a very interesting protocol on cabinet and scrutiny relations, and it's worth a read because it sets out what you can, as guidance really, expect from the cabinet member in terms of how they have a relationship with the select committee, and vice versa as well. A constructive, positive relationship. It's very important. There's nothing worse than not engaging at all with the cabinet member, not briefing them, not informing them about perhaps a particular policy review that you're doing, and you come up with recommendations. It gets sent to cabinet, and cabinet, they're like, well, we just don't agree with this whatsoever. It gets thrown out, and you wasted your time. That doesn't happen because in Hillingdon we have very constructive relationships, and we make sure cabinet members are kept up to date. You're still an independent committee in that respect. You can table your own findings, but it's important to ensure cabinet members are also kept abreast and aware of the work that you're doing as a committee. So we, and through Liz and the clerk and through the chairman, we support that too. Access to information. This is always a topic I get asked by councillors, and it really is on a case-by-case basis. The particular piece of information that the committee might need for their work. What I would say is you do have access to an awful lot of information potentially as a committee. Now, you have additional rights above other councillors to access cabinet member papers, reports, but that's not really relevant in Hillingdon because we do publish all confidential cabinet and cabinet member reports to all councillors. You get to see all confidential cabinet and cabinet member decisions, and background papers that are listed associated with those. So you get to see all of them. Now, you don't have an automatic right to draft reports that aren't even ready yet, that are being worked on before they're published, and clearly things like that, briefing notes and things that are under the cabinet members' domain. Similarly, you can imagine in government you wouldn't have access to ministerial sort of documentation that's in draft form. But when you're undertaking your scrutiny work, you do have an awful lot of access to data and information that the council may hold about that service that you might need, trends, data, stats, figures, whatever it is, to help and support you in your activities. So when you are undertaking your scrutiny role, you do really have a lot of recourse to information. Within reason, reasonable, we can't be asking officers to go and spend a whole month compiling a huge thing for this committee, perhaps, but you do have access to a lot of information to support you. So just do remember that. But you can always come to myself or Liz on a case-by-case basis if you're unsure. And there's so many more other ways to access information, whether it's through witness sessions, surveys potentially, and other ways which you can gain information. I would suggest, and I don't know whether the Chairman would agree with this, that requests for information are dealt with via this committee at committee meetings, so it's clear what you as a committee are asking for. So it's recorded so we all know, and then Liz can go away and get that. And if necessary, circulate it outside the meeting if you need it more urgently to look at or whatever. It doesn't have to wait till the next meeting necessarily if we've got it. And as part of that, there'll be a lot of stats around crime and disorder information, crime stats and things that you'll be getting as a committee as well through your scrutiny functions. Final bit on this slide, when you've got attendees, you've got witnesses coming along. They could be officers, they could be community champion representatives, charity groups, it could be residents themselves, it could be anyone really. Do question them in a fair and balanced manner, particularly officers. When you're quizzing their service areas, you're trying to find out more about what they do and how they do things. Try and do that in a fair and balanced manner. It's pretty straightforward stuff there. And then I'm going to leave you with a final slide on some do's and don'ts. Do try to reach a consensus. Generally, and I think the Chairman would agree, in Hillingdon, overview and scrutiny is not sort of political. Try and work together where possible with both parties. Do challenge, do ask for evidence. When you come to meetings and you've got some witnesses in front of you, whether they're council officers or whatever, you'll have details of who they are on your agenda and everything. And you have a report with information. Do think of some questions you might want to ask. And if you're unsure, just ask Liz, your clerk, and she can help you with those as well. But do think of some useful questions you might want to ask. So do come prepared in advance, which I'm sure you will all do. And some don'ts. Have votes. It's very rare committees have votes. There's one or two times in the past that committees have had votes, but you tend to work well. You tend to form a consensus as a committee. And then I'm going to skip all those other things and go on to the last thing on the don'ts. Focus on individual complaints or concerns. So don't focus on that. This is important because as councillors you get a lot of information on a daily basis from your residents. Complaints, it could be where you're assisting them in respect of a service, the things you send through members' inquiries, where you're building up a lot of information that might be useful to perhaps a topic you're looking at. So you could get some residents complaining about antisocial behaviour issues in your ward, and that's a topic under your remit that you might look at some point. Now, it's clearly not right to bring up that particular complaint or inquiry that you've got about that from that resident, but you could use that complaint in an anecdotal way along with other complaints to talk about the issues that you've experienced or you've learnt about as councillors. So it's pretty obvious stuff. Don't talk about that specific complaint and the detail of that complaint and clearly the resident's name, but you could use that complaint in a general sense about what it's about and other complaints to bring to this committee. It's part of amplifying the voice of residents that you represent through this committee. That's it from me, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark, for a very thorough presentation. I will now invite questions from members. If you wish to ask a question or comment, please indicate by raising your hand. Or okay, we'll start with Councillor Gardner. Thank you.
On the scrutiny call-in, I don't think you mentioned whether or not there had to be a special cabinet meeting on the issue that we would want revisited or scrutinised, or would it just be the bog standard regular one?
Yeah, they've got to hear it within a certain time frame, so it will probably be, I imagine, unless one's already nearby on the, around that time, it would have to be a special one. Yeah, they'd have to convene.
Cheers.
Okay. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. External scrutiny of local public agencies. To what degree can the committee challenge these agencies, please?
Yeah, you have. It's just the same really as a council, as your ability to scrutinise council services. So you'll get a report twice yearly from our community safety manager, which will detail some of the key stats and performance of the police, perhaps the fire brigade and other agencies, and you're able to question the senior police or fire brigade officers and others about the performance, so how they're tackling burglaries, how they're tackling crime, and you can refer to, like I say, issues that you may have experienced, or you can bring forward as ward councillors as well to that discussion. So yes, you do have a lot of information, and you'll be able to ask probing questions where you feel right. Yeah.
Okay. I cannot see any other members showing their hands to ask any further. Councillor Punjab.
When we talk about additionally cross-cutting topics, are these cross-cutting with other select committees, or is that what you mean by cross-cutting topics?
Yeah, so they're cross-cutting topics, but they would be, you would, if, say, climate change would focus on, would cover actually all the other select committees' work, well, maybe not the health and social care possibly, but a lot of select committees' work, so the property, highways and transport select committee, there's a lot of work going on around the council's corporate buildings and energy efficiency, but you could look at that as part of your wider climate change brief. So you have a roving role, if you like, which would cover other select committees' remits in that way. A perfect example is the Finance and Property Select Committee, who were here last night. They have a roving remit of resident experience. So they could be doing a review into that potentially, which might touch on services in under your area, but from the resident experience angle. So yeah, absolutely.
Councillor Punjab, do you wish to add a follow-up? Yes, of course.
So how would we collaboratively and cohesively work together? Does that come back to us, or how do we cross-cut?
Yeah. So I mean, this is all about what information you want. So you'll get on climate change in particular, you'll get the council's action plan. It will come to this committee, so you're able to ask questions across the range of actions in the action plan, whether it touches on other select committees or whatever. You're able to probe that because it's under your remit. There are some, if you decide to do a big review into I don't know, say Heathrow or HS2, and it touches on perhaps some of the transportation elements in the other select committee, then one way, as a committee, you might want to be more collaborative. You could perhaps invite the chairman or some members of that select committee to attend as you know, as a one-off to some of the reviews or topics that you're discussing. There's a lot of flexibility in terms of that. It's all down to the chairman ultimately, but you know, that's a route that's been used before, where you're looking at something that's cross-cutting, it's touching on another select committee, and you say, well, actually, let's invite them along so they can take part in discussion as well. So there's lots of ways we can explore when you're doing that, but we can look at it on a case-by-case basis. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions before we move on? I can see none, so thank you very much, Mark, for that presentation. We'll move on now to the next item, which is item 6, the forward plan. As Mark has mentioned earlier, he's given a description of what the forward plan is about, but if you do have any questions, by all means, please ask. But in terms of the actual forward plan itself, are there any comments or questions, or are we happy to note the forward plan as stated? Councillor Sullivan, could you use your microphone, please?
Sorry,
Thank you.
Just one, the local flood risk management. It mentions Victoria Borman. She's left. Who will be replacing her? Do we know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, you're right. We will update that. We may have already, but
okay.
Thank you very much. Are we happy to note that? Thank you very much. And our last item for this evening is our work programme. Again, it is for noting, but as you'll see, there's a number of items on there, and our main meeting will be next month in July, where we will look at selecting a topic review. But by all means, if you do have any ideas or suggestions, feel free to say them now or give them to Liz outside of the meeting in preparation for that meeting in July. That would assist the officers further. Councillor Gardner, do you wish to say something?
Yeah, I've got a topic that I'd like, if possible, from a customer point of view, housing services, in terms of housing reception and things like that. I suspect none of us can creep down there because they know who we are, but it'll have to be, what are they called, secret shoppers or something. Is that would that be possible?
I think with any suggestions here this evening, what I would do is ask Liz to look at them outside of the meeting and liaise with the officers, and they will come back to us in due course and let us know. And if we can look at it, we will. Yep. Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I wonder if we could look at two things potentially. One around homelessness post-pandemic. Obviously, a lot of work was done to take homeless people off the streets during the pandemic, and the impact that that's had on in and around Hillingdon. And the second one that I sort of coined modern enforcement, the issues that have come up around enforcement with things like delivery drivers, and the impact that they're having on our high streets. I think almost every councillor on this committee represents a high street or has a high street within their ward, so certainly that's having a great impact and a wider, but the positives that they have, but also the impact that they have on antisocial behaviour, parking, etc., and the enforcement of that within our high streets and surrounding areas, I think would be an interesting topic for this, interesting two topics for this committee to cover. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Smallwood over parking. I would like to have a review into parking. It is an informative item, and how sort of review over how well we are working with enforcement. The previous committee we had before we looked at the high street regeneration, I would like to get a sort of update at some point during the course of the year, because there were some final things that happened at the back end of last year. And I think there was a final report that was due to be produced on the high street regeneration events and so forth. And also the SIL report. Are we getting something on anything on Section 106 during the course of the year as well? Or is it just the SIL?
Mark or Liz, would you like to comment?
I mean, you know, you get the quarterly. There's an annual report that goes to Cabinet now, and that's actually on the agenda for the July, which summarises the planning obligations. So do read that, and also the SIL monies. I think there is a requirement for us to publish some SIL expenditure and SIL statement, community infrastructure statement. Apologies for that annually. So I can't see a reason why it can't include planning obligations too. It's all, you know, more or less the same thing, isn't it? So.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. Sort of in connection with that also was the update on the system that's being developed for identifying, you know, where the SIL's going, where it's coming from, etc., etc. That was something that's still in the pipeline. I'd like to sort of get a progress update on where that is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Liz is very furiously writing down notes, so we'll get back to you on those. So just to mention as well, obviously the work programme is quite restricted into what we can fit onto it through the course of a year. Where we can't always do reviews, the next best option is an information item, which we do try to accommodate many times in the past. So if we can't get it as a review by whatever reasons given, we will get it as an information item at some point on the work programme, maybe not this year, but certainly next year. Sorry, Mark, do you wish to say something?
Well, just to elaborate on your useful point there is, you might be thinking as a committee, we really want to do a thorough review into this area because we've identified some issues, and you might think, well, okay, and we actually, when you come to the July meeting, we've got a scorecard which will help you try and pick review topics which will hopefully add real value and result in something that's going to be really good going forward to Cabinet. So we've got ways to assist you with that, but a very good way of testing that out beforehand is to have, as the Chairman said, an information report on the issue. So bring the officer along, ask those questions, and then if you still feel, gosh, there is something here we would like to look at more, then that's very useful. So information reports before you even think about it as a review item could be quite useful. So just bear that in mind.
Thank you very much. I have two further points I'd like to add. So the allotments update on the one-off monitoring, that has now been moved to November, Liz, that's correct. so there's a small change on that one. And also members may have seen at the bottom the committee site visits. I've held discussions with officers outside of the meeting, and I think particularly with new members, but also for members such as myself who've been around a little while now, visits to frontline services really does help you in your work in getting to the bottom of things and finding out how departments work, etc. It's an alternative way to sitting in a committee room looking at slides. I personally prefer that, but that's just me. But there is an opportunity there. There are some suggestions there already listed. We are working on additional ones as well. But by all means, if you have any on there that are not listed that you feel you'd like to go and see, and it's potentially within the remit of this committee and what we look at, then do suggest it to Liz, and we can speak with the officers outside the meeting and potentially line that up in the future. But you'll get more information on these in the coming weeks and months. Please try and attend them if you can. We are going to try and do some evenings as well as daytimes for some of these, because we appreciate not everyone is available during the day. So yeah, just keep an eye out on those ones, but hopefully it will assist you all as new members and also, I'd say, more experienced members as well. With that said, are there any further questions or comments, or are we happy to note it? Okay, thank you very much. And with that said, that concludes our business for this evening. Again, my thanks to you all for attending, and also anyone who is watching us on YouTube. The meeting is now finished at 8:45. Thank you very much.